Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Pointy Not Sharp. Today we're taking a look at a German SG 84x98 Mark III bayonet. The SG stands for Seitengewehre or sidearm in German. Please excuse my butchering of the German language. My common Australian tongue is not good for it. So this bayonet is made to fit the 8mm Mauser Kar98K rifle as used by Germany in the Second World War. And the bayonet was made all throughout Germany by a large selection of makers and manufacturers, mainly in Solingen, which is of course the town famous for German blade makers, going back to the 14th century. Now, a handful of these were also made in occupied countries in Austria and France. They're not too common, but there are a few out there, so if you come across them, you've done pretty well. So the history of this blade actually goes back a little way. So it traces its history back to the Mauser 71/84 rifle, which was fitted with the 71/84 knife bayonet. So prior to that, the Germans, like everyone else, were using big, beautiful sabres. And for the 71/84, they had their first repeating rifle. They made a nice little utility knife type bayonet, which was quite short and actually has the same blade profile as what we have here. Now, with the introduction of the Gewehre 98 rifle in 1898, they went back to long and pointy bayonets. So they introduced the 98 quillback, which was one of the longest bayonets Germany ever had, with a cusp hung on the end. Then after that, in 1905, they introduced the 98/05, which is the butcher blade. I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with that. It's a very iconic blade. But then in 05 and 06, 1905, 1906, they started manufacturing the model 84/98, which is essentially the first iteration of what we have here. This is the third iteration. So the first iteration had a wooden handle and did not have a metal flash guard on the rear. They didn't make them in large numbers and they weren't standard issue at the time. They were still using the butcher blade as standard issue and issuing whatever they had on hand. My understanding is they used the 84/98 for, I think it was specialist troops and rear esh. You didn't want to lug around a giant heavy bayonet. Anyway, towards the end of the First World War, they made a second production, which was the 84/98 Mark II, and that's a bit similar to what we have here. So it has the wooden handle instead of the Bakelite, and then they introduced the flash guard on the rear. And the reason they introduced the flash guard is originally this bayonet was made to fit a long rifle. So as you can see, it mounts in here to the rifle, and the Gewehre 98 being a long rifle would have the barrel all the way up here. However, during the war, they were fitting these to carbines. Carbines, of course, having shorter barrels back here, but the same bayonet lug. So they were finding that the flash from shots was charring the wooden grips. So they introduced these flash guards, not just onto the 84/98s, but also onto the 98/05s. So you'll find those on the later war production from the First World War 98/05s, as well as the a second pattern of 84/98 bayonets, and the third. So in 1934, Germany started rearming. Which was a bit naughty because at the time they were still under the Treaty of Versailles, which limited them to 84,000 rifles. So they wanted to start manufacturing, but discreetly, without the Allies catching wind of what they were doing. So they devised a clever number code for the manufacturers on their bayonets to make it difficult to establish where and when they were being manufactured. So I'll go through the markings on those later, towards the end of the video. But yeah, there is a little bit of a code there. Then in 1937 through to 41, in 1936, Germany officially renounced the Treaty of Versailles. So they weren't going to follow it. And they started putting their manufacturers plainly stated on everything that was being manufactured, as is the case here. We'll go over the markings later. And then 41 to 45, they again moved to a letter code to disguise where these were being manufactured. And that was to deceive the Allies to prevent strategic bombing from taking out their factories. This was done across the board with all of their arms. Now, I understand bayonet production wasn't exactly key to winning the war, so it's just that it was included with bayonet production, but it wasn't designed specifically for bayonet production. It was more to protect the production of tanks and planes and important war produce. So we'll take a look at the construction. Now, straight off the bat, we've got a pretty standard Mauser style blade with a fuller on either side. There's nothing too special about that. Very nice deep blue. Blade's not too sharp. I don't think it's ever been sharpened. Then moving down, we've got our little cross guard. So this is quite typical of a 8498. It does not have a muzzle ring. It's just got these little ears. It's completely normal. Then we've got our little oiling hole on both sides, or inspection hole. I've heard it referred to as both. And the flash guard, as previously stated, to prevent charring on the back of the bayonet when firing a carbine. And you'll notice the grips are made of a plastic material. It's actually Bakelite. A nice deep rich colour. They also come in lighter colours, like a sort of an orangey red colour, quite beautiful. And they also come in wood. So the Mark IIIs were also manufactured in wood, and you'll find both. And then a nice big solid pommel. Really long, deep mortise, you'll note. And the reason for that is that without a muzzle ring, they can still fit it securely to a rifle, and it won't affect the ballistics of the rifle itself when being fired. So when fitting a bayonet with a muzzle ring, it puts pressure on the muzzle, the end of the barrel, will affect the trajectory of a round. But with a nice, deep, long mortise like this, they can fit it very, very securely to the bayonet lug only. So that's quite a favourable trait to have in a bayonet. Standard push button, nothing special there. Now, I've removed the scabbard from the frog. Standard Mauser style scabbard, standard stud, little ball panel at the end and throat. And yeah, very standard style Mauser frog. So we'll get into the markings of the bayonet now. Actually, before I do, one thing you might not notice looking at this in a video is the handle on this bayonet is absolutely huge. Now, I've got quite a big hand. I'm 6'2", 6'3", and there's a solid inch that, you know, that's sticking out the bottom there when I'm holding this thing. It's an absolute monster. So for comparison, I've got a Austro-Hungarian bayonet. It's in quite rough condition, so ignore that. Now, the blade length is actually the same, and the blade profile is virtually identical. But you'll notice the handle is a lot smaller, and these do have a smaller handle, but it just goes to show how big this one is. It's absolutely massive. And the handle itself is quite light. So it's yeah, very well made. I like it. Anyway, as promised, we'll jump into markings. So the earlier iteration of these, made in 34 to 37, they had the number code. So the number code was found on the Ricasso only. Now this is 37 to 41, so you won't see it here. But what they had was a letter prefix S for small arms, then a dash, then they had a number code for the manufacturer, and that would have been a three-digit number. And then after that, they would have had another letter, and that letter was the year of manufacture. So K is 1934, G 1935, and S 1936. And then obviously in 36, they've renounced the Treaty of Versailles, and they've gone to standard manufacturer's markings, or commercial trademarks. And that's exactly what we have here. So on the Ricasso here, we have the manufacturer, Carl Icahn, sorry. quite a nice manufacturer. And then on the spine of the blade, we have the year of manufacture, 39, made 1939. And then serial number. Now, if you're not familiar with Mauser style serial numbers, the letter prefix represents 10,000. So if it had no prefix, that would be the first 10,000. So if there was no letter prefix, that would be number 2812. If that was A, that would be 12,812. Because that's C, that's 32,812 in production. So that's how you make sense of those serial numbers. And on top of the serial numbers, we also have a number of waffen amps, which is inspection marks. So we have 2 on the pommel, just here. And you'll notice we've got the straight-winged eagle with a code beneath it. I'll explain exactly what that is in a minute. Got another one on the flash guard. Now, this isn't typical. They're usually only found on the pommel, but you can find them virtually anywhere on the grips, the flash guard, the crosspiece, the tang, virtually anywhere, depending on the manufacturer and the inspector. But generally, they're only required to have 2 on the pommel. Now, the actual code beneath the eagle there, it reads, let's see if I can get that to focus. I got this under a magnifying glass before, that's how I was able to read it. So it's a capital W, lowercase a, capital A, 263 was what I was able to make out. And that appears to be the same for all 3 of them on the bayonet. Now, before 1937, that inspection mark was slightly different. The eagle had drooping wings, and then in 1937 onwards, the wings were made straight. The number below the eagle, apparently that represents the inspection team leader number. So that's a number to identify inspection teams, and the number's allocated to the inspection team leader. I haven't found any kind of reference to show who the inspectors were for the numbers, and as far as I could tell, that's actually lost to time. That's not known. So I'll grab the scabbard out. We'll have a look at the markings on that. So same as the bayonet, we've got the manufacturer, Carl Econ, and 1939. Then on the reverse, we have serial number. And beautiful, lucky for us, we have a matching serial number. We also have another waffen art on the ball finale on the base of the scabbard there. It's upside down. Now these are usually a lot more difficult to make out just because of the construction of the ball there. But that one's not too bad. And the scabbard itself, unfortunately, it's too worn. Whatever markings there were, long gone. Now, I haven't found any clear records on how many of these were manufactured, and the general consensus seems to be that it's more than 14.5 million, which is a fair number. Unfortunately, there aren't any surviving records, and those numbers are based on collectors who have managed to gather enough records. I think they've managed to gather the records about 12 or 13,000 of these bayonets together and come up with some meaningful data based on serial numbers and manufacturers, and based on their findings, the estimates are about 14.5 million. They're pretty common on the collector's market. Unfortunately, down here in Australia, they do cost a premium because there's not a terrible lot of them down here. I was just chatting to a fella up in the States who picked up a great condition one for $25, so good for him. That being said though, very sturdy bayonet. I really like it. I want to get one for myself. This belongs to a collector who's very generously loaned it to me to have a look at. But yeah, if you know anything I've missed or if I've made any grievous errors, guys, comment below. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching.